the NATO forces that have been trained for this offensive, the 9 to 12 brigades, constitute around 50, 60,000 troops. Um, the battle for Bakhmut cost Ukraine 75,000 dead. And if you don't understand that, that just ripped a gaping hole in the Ukrainian order of battle, and that was devastating to the morale of the Ukrainians. And that made it impossible for Ukraine to survive, literally, after if they went and lost another 60,000, which you're preparing to do in this counteroffensive. Um, I mean, Bakhmut will go down in the history of this conflict as one of the pivotal moments. It's where the back of the Ukrainian military was broken by Wagner in the fighting for
Mm.
Bakhmut. This was bloody fighting. Wagner suffered, I think, an estimated 30,000 dead, which is a lot of dead.
Yeah.
But understand that Wagner was fighting in an urban environment. Um, Normally, when you're on the attacking side, you want a 3-to-1 advantage over the defender. That means for every one defender, you need three of your guys. But
Okay.
Wagner is attacking a fortified urban uh, target, which means that you would want to have 5 or 7 to 1
I see.
advantage. Wagner was attacking at a 1 to 3, 1 to 4 disadvantage. That is, for every 3 or 4 Ukrainian defenders, there was just one Wagner
So they're
fighter.
outnumbered.
They're outnumbered, but they had better tactics. They had better command and control,
Hmm.
better operational sense. They had also, I think, a better um, fighting spirit. They were able to maintain pressure against the Ukrainians on a continuous basis, and they wore the Ukrainians down, and then they killed them. It's called the meat grinder for a reason. Um, but the Wagner operation um, became a deliberate killing machine. Sometime I would believe in May, when it was clear that the Ukrainians were going to defend the Solidar Bakhmut complex. The decision was made not to focus on territorial gains, but on giving the Ukrainians the opportunity to reinforce and die. And that was the success of the Wagner operation, is that they pulled in um, tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers who would otherwise be alive today and be able to support the counteroffensive that's underway. So Bakhmut ripped the heart out of the Ukrainian army even before this counteroffensive began.
There's this new decree, shall we say, that was issued by Putin that members of Wagner and other auxiliary forces, shall we put it, have to sign an agreement to fully integrate into the Russian armed forces. And Prigozhin is saying that no one's going to sign a single contract. Do you see a power struggle here between Shoigu, the defense minister, and Prigozhin? Because you've seen the videos and the messages where he's trashing them and saying you're not giving us enough support. But now that they have to sign this contract,
I think a lot of what Prigozhin was doing during the actual battle was part of a psychological warfare operation against the Ukrainians to create the perception of disunity, disharmony, weakness, um, so that the Ukrainians wouldn't withdraw from Bakhmut, but double down on stupid and say, we have a chance to win. All we have to do is push, and Wagner will collapse because they have this dysfunction. But I think the source of the dysfunction is real. I think there's real dissatisfaction between um, elements of Wagner and the Russian Ministry of Defense. Wagner was created as a unique contracting vehicle to provide military expertise to the militias of the Donbass and Donetsk and Lugansk at a time when the territory was Ukrainian, and Russia is constitutionally prohibited from providing military forces. They can't deploy the regular Russian army onto Ukrainian soil. So Wagner was created. People call it a mercenary outfit. It's not a mercenary outfit. Mercenaries
mm-hmm.
don't die for their country. Mercenaries fight for money.
Right?
And the purpose of mercenaries are to live and go spend that money. Wagner is composed of 100% Russian patriots, people
Mm-hmm.
who are ready to lay their lives down for their country, but they operate on a different contractual basis than the regular army because legally that's what has to happen. But one thing that has happened is that um, now that Lugansk and Donetsk have been absorbed by Russia and now Russian territories, and now that Russia's had a chance to harmonize Russian legal structures with those two territories, Wagner no longer operates within the framework of the Russian Constitution or Russian law. You can't be a private military contractor. Now, what complicates this further is the fact that the private military contractor is just is a contractual subterfuge. Wagner, I believe, works for Russian military intelligence, the GRU, and takes its orders from the Russian General Staff. It's a specialized combat unit for specialized tasks and purposes. And I do believe that if Wagner is going to continue to operate on Russian soil, that there will have to be a legal normalization of Wagner. But you want to do this in a manner that doesn't compromise that which makes Wagner special. And that is, of course, its unique command structure, very streamlined command procedures, and the esprit de corps that comes with having a military system that's based upon a meritocracy where the most qualified people rise to the top, and competence is treasured overall. And that's why Wagner's not in the front lines right now, because Wagner has until August, I think August 5th is when Prigozhin said they'll be reintroduced, to get their act together. And if they don't, I don't think Wagner will be reintroduced. I don't see Wagner, Prigozhin isn't going to get his way. That's the bottom line. The Wagner, either Wagner as an institution or each individual member of Wagner will be compelled to enter into a legally binding relationship with the Russian government that is consistent with the Constitution of Russia. This is an absolute prerequisite, and it will happen because the Russian military understands that Wagner is a unique asset that is, well positioned to provide lethal battlefield support. It's a force multiplier, and there are going to be future battles in well-defined geographical areas where having Wagner take over that sector would be to the benefit of Russia. So I see them solving this problem, but there is a problem between Prigozhin and Shoigu. Prigozhin's made it personal, and he's going to have to either back down or move out of the way. But let's just make this clear. Prigozhin, I don't believe he has any ambition of challenging Putin. That is ludicrous. But B, if he were, he wouldn't survive very long. And I'm not saying dying. I'm just saying that Prigozhin has to understand that he exists because of Putin, and Putin can make all that which defines Prigozhin go away that quick. And if Prigozhin doubts it, he just needs to pick up the phone and call Khodorkovsky in London and say, "Hey, how'd that work out when you took on Putin? What happened? You went to jail for a long time, right? Now you're in exile. Yeah, it worked out really well for you. It won't work out for Prigozhin. So Prigozhin's going to have to tone it down."
Yeah, I certainly didn't think that Putin would enter the discussion. I thought maybe Shoigu, because he usually I get the vibes of Sudan, where you have Dagalo, who with his rapid strike forces, and after Bashir was gone out of the picture, it's because his rapid strike forces were also in the army, but not really. It's kind of like Wagner. But anyway, I was wondering if you heard yesterday Shoigu's speech. He was talking about the United States and UK striking Crimea, or planning to strike Crimea, and he singled out the HIMARS system, and he singled out the Storm Shadow system. So those are our things. And he was saying that if you do this, if you hit Crimea, this is going to be outside the scope of the special military operation. So it was like he was essentially saying that we will consider this a declaration of war, right?
He said that we will recognize you as parties to the conflict, but then he said that Russia will strike back at decision-making centers in Ukraine. So understand
I thought this was already the case.
Again, no. the fact that that Zelensky is able to live, the fact that the Ukrainian parliament is able to meet, the
Right,
fact
right.
that
I meant that
any
we're
of these
parties
Ukrainian,
to the conflict. I thought that was
yeah,
clear to them.
the fact that any of these Ukrainian personalities can get on TV and be
Yeah.
photographed is proof positive that Russia has not made the concerted decision to suppress Ukrainian command and control, Ukrainian decision making centers. They have, on limited occasions, struck against select targets um, in retaliation for select deeds.
Hmm.
But I think what Shoigu is saying here is that should Ukraine use these American and British supplied weapon systems against Crimea, that all restrictions against decision making targets will be lifted. And it's just sort of a polite way of saying we're going to kill you all, because that's what will happen. They will strike every place these people are hiding, every place they operate, and there will no longer be um, freedom to govern Ukraine as they see fit. The government will be hiding in holes in the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I meant that we are already parties to the conflict. I thought that that much was clear, but you know, the level of escalation is getting more and more dangerous. And did you see the peace treaty that or draft peace treaty that Putin held up when the African delegation arrived in to see first Zelensky and then him? And he, you know, he said that we signed this over a year ago, so that, you know, this was already signed by the Ukrainian delegation, and the, you know, at the time it was understood that the, you know, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson went down and told Zelensky to pull out. I mean, this whole war could have been over a year ago already, over a year ago. What happened here?
Well, remember, let's back up even further. When France and Germany and Ukraine pulled out of Minsk
Mm-hmm.
effectively in October of 2021, um, they, they shut the door on what could have been an automatic peace environment. And think of it today. What are the Ukrainians demanding of Russia? Um, they're demanding that Russia gets out of all of their territories. Now, the Ukrainians have suggested that Crimea could be up for negotiation. So, had the Ukrainians accepted Minsk, they'd be getting the same thing that they're now sacrificing hundreds of thousands of their troops to accomplish.
Yeah.
But it was Ukraine that, and together with Germany and France, that pulled out of Minsk. Then Russia turned around and said, "Well, if we're not going to do Minsk, let's do a new European security framework." And they put two draft treaties on the table, one for NATO, one for the United States, and said, "Let's talk about this." But they were ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they had no choice but to carry out a, preemptive act of self-defense, which is legitimized under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. Um, here's the interesting thing. People say, "Well, where's the evidence of that, Ritter?" Well, I don't have it. I mean, it's been hinted at, suggested, but people are saying because the Russians didn't put it out there, it can't exist. I think what Putin just did is prove that the Russians don't say something unless they have documented fact. The
Yeah.
Russians said early on that the Ukrainians had agreed to this, but the Ukrainians were denying. Putin has now put out documented fact, what the Ukrainians did, and the Russians are sitting on this. I think the Russians have to do a better job of information warfare, especially when it comes to establishing who is responsible for this war, because it's not Russia. Russia is not responsible for this war. NATO is responsible. The United States is responsible. England is responsible. Germany is responsible. France is responsible. Ukraine is responsible. These are the responsible parties to this conflict. Russia was backed into a corner and literally had no other choice. Had Russia not intervened when it did, um, there's every reason to believe that in the first week of March of 2022, the Ukrainians would have launched an assault with overwhelming force. Remember, NATO has been training the Ukrainian military since 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And this NATO trained army was assembling in the Donbass, ready to carry out an offensive strike against the you know breakaway areas of Donetsk and Lugansk. That's why Russia launched a preemptive strike to nullify that and then put Ukraine in a position where it would have to consider terms of surrender. That was the whole purpose of the special military operation. It wasn't to steamroll the Ukrainian army, take Kiev, etc. It was to create the perception of danger sufficient enough to get the Ukrainians to the negotiating table, which Russia did within 3 days of the war starting. Ukraine was negotiating in Gomel, Belarus, and then get them to conclude a peace treaty that met some of Russia's primary goals and objectives, which the Ukrainians signed off on and should have been implementing on 1 April. But NATO intervened, pulled the plug on that. These were decisions made by NATO, made by Ukraine, not by Russia. Russia didn't want to be involved in this war, but here we are today. But the reality is that Russia has in effect ceded the information warfare theater of operations to Ukraine and the United States, who are in the business of just flooding the zone, so to speak, with disinformation. Now, the Russian strategy, again, I can't defend it because I don't know their reasoning, but I will tell you this. Russian reality is becoming readily visible to everybody, meaning that everything Russia has said is coming true. The Ukrainians are Nazis. There can no longer be a debate about this. We see the odious nature of this regime. We see their soldiers worshiping Stepan Bandera, wearing the insignia of the Nazis.
It's shameful.
So that's not even a question right now. And then the question of, can Russia win? I think that's being answered. Russia's winning right now decisively. How will this war end? I think that's also being decided right now with a Russian strategic victory. So the Russians are basically letting their actions speak for themselves. They're not in the business of trying to impress you and I with the sophistication of their press releases. They're in the business of winning this war, and right now that's exactly what they're doing.